Gabriel, we need to talk. Gabriel glanced up from unlacing his boots, his hands pausing mid-motion. It was a Thursday evening, and the weight of another long day at the store hung heavily on him. Charlotte's tone, sharp and unfamiliar, immediately put him on edge. He stepped into the kitchen, where Charlotte sat at the table, her hands folded tightly as though they were bracing for impact. The warm glow of the overhead light cast shadows on her face, hardening her usually gentle features. "Sure, honey. What's on your mind?" Gabriel asked, hanging his coat on the back of a chair. He noticed Brianna standing near the doorway, her arms crossed and her phone clutched in one hand. She was unusually silent for a teenager who was usually glued to her screen or chattering away. Charlotte's words hit him like a brick. "I'm leaving you, Gabriel." Gabriel blinked, unsure if he'd heard her correctly. He chuckled nervously, hoping it was some cruel joke. "Leaving? What are you talking about?" Charlotte didn't flinch. Her face remained cold and resolute. "I'm done living this life, Gabriel. You don't have ambition. You don't have a plan. You're a floor manager at Walmart, for God's sake. I've met someone who can actually give me, and Brianna, the life we deserve." The room seemed to tilt. Gabriel leaned against the counter, gripping it for support as his mind raced. He swallowed hard and tried to steady his voice. "Someone? What do you mean, someone?" "Charlotte, what are you saying?" She sighed, her exasperation evident. "I'm talking about Andrew. My boss. He's everything you're not. Successful, wealthy, confident. He loves me, Gabriel. He sees my worth, and he's offering me a future." Gabriel's gaze darted to Brianna, hoping to find some flicker of disagreement or shock in her expression. Instead, she stared back at him with a mixture of defiance and pity. "Brianna, please," he said, his voice cracking. "You can't agree with this. You're my daughter." Brianna shifted uncomfortably, but didn't lower her gaze. "Dad, I'm sorry, but she's right. Andrew can give us the kind of life you never could. A private jet, vacations, a huge mansion. It's what we deserve. You're just not enough." The word struck him harder than any physical blow ever could. "Not enough?" Gabriel repeated, his voice barely above a whisper. "I've done everything for you, for both of you. I've worked late nights, sacrificed. How can you say this?" Charlotte stood abruptly, pushing her chair back with a scrape. "We've wasted enough time pretending this could work. You're not ambitious, Gabriel. You've settled for mediocrity, and I won't let that drag me, or Brianna, down anymore." Gabriel's legs felt weak, but he forced himself to stand tall. "Charlotte, don't do this. Don't throw away 18 years of marriage because some rich guy is flashing his wallet at you. He doesn't love you. He loves the idea of you." Her laugh was sharp and bitter. "Spare me the moral lecture, Gabriel. Maybe if you'd worked half as hard on becoming a man with ambition as you did on being a doormat, we wouldn't be here." Gabriel turned back to Brianna, desperation creeping into his voice. "Brianna, please. I've always supported you. All those late nights helping you with homework, driving you to practice, making your favorite dinners. Was that all meaningless?" Brianna hesitated for a fraction of a second before responding. "It's not meaningless, Dad. It's just not enough. I don't want to struggle like this anymore. I want a real future, and you can't give me that. Andrew can." Gabriel's hands clenched in a fist at his sides. "You're both leaving? Just like that? After everything I've done? You're walking out for someone you barely know?" Charlotte shrugged, picking up her phone from the table. "Andrew's sending the car tomorrow morning. We're packing tonight. I suggest you don't make this harder than it needs to be." Gabriel felt the air leave his lungs. The woman he had loved for nearly 2 decades, the mother of his child, had discarded him like he was nothing. "Brianna," he said, his voice trembling, "I love you. You're my daughter. If you go now, if you choose this path, it'll change everything. Please don't do this." Brianna met his gaze, her own eyes glistening with unshed tears. But her words were merciless. "We shouldn't waste time with losers like you, Dad. Good luck with your poorness. Hope it doesn't drag you down too much. Bye, loser." The sound of her words reverberated in his ears, leaving him stunned and breathless. Charlotte turned to leave, motioning for Brianna to follow. "This is for the best, Gabriel. One day, maybe you'll understand, Gabriel stood frozen in place as they moved around the house, packing their belongings. He heard drawers opening, the rustling of clothes, the dull thuds of suitcases being zipped shut. Every sound felt like a nail being driven into his chest. When they finally walked out the door, Charlotte didn't look back. Brianna paused for a moment, her hand on the doorframe. For a fleeting second, Gabriel thought she might change her mind. But she only whispered, "Goodbye, Dad," before closing the door behind her. The silence that followed was deafening. Gabriel stood in the middle of the empty kitchen, staring at the space where his family had been. His hands trembled as he sank into a chair, the weight of their betrayal pressing down on him like a physical force. He reached for his phone, staring at the family photo on the screen. It was taken 2 years ago at a 4th of July barbecue. They were all smiling, arms wrapped around each other. The happiness in their eyes now felt like a cruel illusion. Gabriel set the phone down and buried his face in his hands. The pain was unbearable, but as the hours passed and the initial shock began to fade, a new emotion started to surface. Anger. Not the fiery, reckless kind of anger, but a cold, simmering resolve. They thought he was a loser. They thought he was a failure, unworthy of their love. "Fine," he muttered to himself, his voice hoarse. "If that's how they see me, I'll show them just how wrong they are." He sat up straighter, his jaw tightening. The man who had stood idly by, who had let life happen to him, was gone. What remained was someone determined to rebuild, not for them, but for himself. Gabriel had lost everything that night, but in the ashes of his shattered life, a spark of determination began to burn. Gabriel sat on the edge of his bed, staring blankly at the darkened room. The only sound was the faint hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen. He hadn't turned on the TV in days. His once warm and lively home now felt like a hollow shell, echoing with the memories of laughter and chatter that had disappeared the moment Charlotte and Brianna walked out the door. He rubbed his face, his fingers brushing against the stubble on his jawline. He hadn't shaved in 3 days. His mind replayed their parting words on an endless loop. "Loser, you're not enough. We deserve better." He clenched his fists, fighting the rising wave of anger and sorrow that threatened to consume him. The next morning, Gabriel arrived at Walmart before sunrise. The parking lot was mostly empty, save for a few employees gathering by the entrance. His coworker, Mike, approached him, holding a coffee cup. "Morning, Dave. You good, man?" Mike asked, concern evident in his voice. Gabriel forced a smile. "Yeah, just tired. Long week." Mike didn't look convinced. "You've been working doubles all week. You sure you're okay?" Gabriel shrugged. "Keeps me busy." The truth was, work was the only thing keeping him from spiraling. He spent every possible hour at the store, volunteering for overtime and covering for others. Anything to avoid going home to the silence. During his lunch break, Gabriel sat alone in the break room, poking at a sandwich he wasn't hungry for. His phone buzzed on the table. A notification from social media lit up the screen. Against his better judgment, he opened it. A photo of Charlotte and Brianna greeted him. They were standing in front of a sprawling mansion, smiling brightly. The caption read, "New beginnings with Andrew. Couldn't be happier." Gabriel stared at the screen, his chest tightening. The post had dozens of comments, many praising Charlotte for upgrading her life and wishing her the best. He slammed the phone face down on the table, breathing heavily. His appetite vanished completely. That night, Gabriel sat in the living room, surrounded by photo albums and framed pictures. He picked up a photo of Brianna from her 10th birthday party. She was beaming, her face smeared with frosting as she held up a slice of cake. He remembered how she had begged him to let her have a sleepover, and he had stayed up all night, making sure the girls were safe and entertained. "What happened to you?" he whispered, his voice cracking. The weight of the betrayal pressed down on him, but he refused to let himself break. Instead, he placed the photo back on the table and stood up. The next day, Gabriel went to the bank during his lunch break. He sat across from a financial advisor, a middle-aged woman named Karen. She glanced at his account details on her computer. "Mr. Carter, you've got some savings here, but it's not a lot. Are you planning on investing, or—" "I need to figure out how to grow it," Gabriel interrupted. "I don't care how small it is now. I need to make it work Karen raised an eyebrow. Investing can be risky, especially if you don't have a lot of capital. Have you considered taking a course or speaking to someone about starting a business? Gabriel nodded slowly. Yeah, I've been thinking about it. Karen slid a pamphlet across the desk. This program helps people with small budgets learn the basics of starting a business. It's not a magic fix, but it's a good place to start. Gabriel took the pamphlet, clutching it tightly. Thank you. Over the next few weeks, Gabriel threw himself into research. He spent hours reading books and watching online tutorials about entrepreneurship. After his shifts, he would sit at his kitchen table, scribbling notes and brainstorming ideas. One evening, Mike stopped by with a six-pack of beer. You've been working like crazy, man, Mike said, setting the beers on the table. Figured you could use a break. Gabriel gestured to the pile of papers and books on the table. Can't. I'm busy. Mike picked up one of the books and smirked. Starting a business for dummies? He looked at Gabriel. You serious about this? Gabriel nodded. Dead serious. Mike sat down and opened a beer. All right. What's the plan? Gabriel hesitated before answering. I don't have all the details yet, but I'm not staying at Walmart forever. I need to do something bigger. Mike studied him for a moment, then nodded. Good for you, man. Just don't burn yourself out. As the months passed, Gabriel began to feel a shift. His pain and anger hadn't disappeared, but they had transformed into fuel. He saved every spare penny, cutting out unnecessary expenses and living frugally. One night, he attended a networking event at a local community center. It was a small gathering of aspiring entrepreneurs and business owners. Gabriel felt out of place at first, but he pushed through his discomfort. By the end of the night, he had exchanged contact information with several people, including a man named Richard who ran a small tech startup. You ever thought about getting into software development? Richard asked. Gabriel shook his head. I don't know anything about it. Richard grinned. That's the beauty of it. You don't have to know everything. You just have to hire people who do. If you're serious, let's grab coffee next week. I can show you the ropes. That meeting with Richard became the turning point. With his guidance, Gabriel began laying the groundwork for his own tech company. It was slow and grueling work, but for the first time in months, Gabriel felt a sense of purpose. There were days when the doubt crept back in, when he wondered if he was wasting his time. But every time he thought about giving up, he remembered Charlotte's words. You're not enough. He would grit his teeth and push forward, determined to prove her wrong. Not for her, but for himself. A year after Charlotte and Brianna had left, Gabriel stood in front of a small team of developers in a rented office space. It wasn't much, a few desks, some secondhand computers, but it was a start. All right, everyone, he said, addressing the team. This is just the beginning. We've got a long road ahead, but I believe in what we're building here. As he spoke, he felt a flicker of pride. He had hit rock bottom, but he hadn't stayed there. He was climbing one step at a time, and he wasn't going to stop until he reached the top. Gabriel stared at the blank sheet of paper in front of him, his hand gripping a pen so tightly that his knuckles turned white. The small desk in his rented one-bedroom apartment was cluttered with notes, receipts, and sketches of ideas. The early days of building his company felt more like chasing a mirage in the desert than laying the foundation for an empire. One day, during a late-night brainstorming session, his phone buzzed. It was Richard, his mentor from the networking event a year ago. Gabriel, I've got a lead on a potential client, Richard said, his voice filled with excitement. It's a small logistics firm that needs software to optimize their operations. They're willing to give a newbie a chance if we can deliver within their budget. Gabriel's heart raced. What's the budget? $15,000, Richard replied. Gabriel's stomach sank. It was a shoestring budget for the scope of work required, but it was a lifeline. I'll take it, Gabriel said without hesitation. Good, Richard said. Now, get ready to work harder than you ever have. The first project was grueling. Gabriel worked around the clock, eating instant noodles at his desk and collapsing in a bed for a few hours each night. He brought on 2 freelance developers, paying them out of his own savings. There were countless roadblocks, bugs in the code, missed deadlines, and moments of doubt when the client threatened to cancel the contract. But Gabriel pushed through, learning from every mistake and rallying his small team. When the project finally launched, it exceeded the client's expectations. The logistics firm saw a 30% increase in efficiency, and word of Gabriel's company began to spread. Over the next few years, Gabriel built on that momentum. He named his company Infinity Systems, inspired by his belief in limitless possibilities. The small wins grew into larger ones. A mid-sized retail chain hired him to develop a customer analytics platform. Then a regional transportation company contracted Infinity Systems to overhaul its fleet management software. Despite the progress, the journey was far from smooth. One evening, Gabriel sat in a cramped conference room with his three-person team, staring at a stack of unpaid invoices. His operations manager, Lisa, looked worried. "Gabriel, we're running on fumes," she said. "If we don't land another contract soon, we won't make payroll next month." Gabriel leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. "We'll find a way. We always do." Lisa hesitated. "There's one more thing. The bank denied our loan application." The news hit him like a punch to the gut. For a moment, he considered giving up, but then he thought of Charlotte's parting words and the look of disdain on Brianna's face. "All right," Gabriel said, standing up. "Let's pivot. We focus on smaller clients, ones that pay faster. We scale back expenses and work lean. No one is giving up on this." Lisa nodded, her confidence bolstered by Gabriel's determination. Years passed, and Infinity Systems finally hit its breakthrough. A government agency, impressed by their work with a transportation company, awarded them a multi-million-dollar contract to develop a secure logistics platform. The deal changed everything. Gabriel expanded his team, moved into a sleek new office building, and began diversifying the company's offerings. He delved into artificial intelligence, renewable energy, and cloud computing. One night, after signing the government contract, Gabriel stood in his office, gazing out at the city skyline. The lights of the buildings glittered like stars. Richard walked in, holding a bottle of champagne. "You did it, Gabriel," he said, grinning. "Infinity Systems is officially in the big leagues." Gabriel turned, a rare smile on his face. "We did it. This wasn't just me." Richard popped the champagne and poured 2 glasses. "To Infinity Systems," he said, raising his glass. "To infinity," Gabriel echoed, clinking his glass against Richard's. By the time Gabriel turned 45, Infinity Systems was a Fortune 500 company. Its valuation soared into the billions, and Gabriel's name became synonymous with innovation and resilience. His personal life also flourished. A few years after the divorce, he had met Claire, a kind-hearted woman with a sharp mind and a genuine smile. They met at a charity event where Claire, a social worker, had been advocating for education reform. Their connection was immediate. Unlike Charlotte, Claire admired Gabriel's humility and drive. She didn't care about his wealth or status. She cared about the man he was becoming. One evening, as they sat on the patio of their home, watching their young twins chase fireflies in the yard, Claire reached for Gabriel's hand. "You've come so far," she said softly. Gabriel looked at her, his heart full. "I couldn't have done it without you. You brought me back to life, Claire." She smiled. "You did that yourself, Gabriel. I just reminded you of what you were capable of." Despite his success, Gabriel never forgot where he came from or the pain that had driven him. He started a foundation to support struggling entrepreneurs, offering grants and mentorship programs. At one of the foundation's events, a young woman approached him nervously. "Mr. Carter, I just wanted to thank you," she said. "Your program gave me the funding I needed to start my bakery. I didn't think I could do it, but your story inspired me." Gabriel smiled, shaking her hand. "I'm glad it helped. Never stop believing in yourself." As he watched her walk away, he thought about his own journey, the sacrifices, the sleepless nights, and the sheer willpower it had taken to get here. He had rebuilt his life, not for revenge, but for himself. And yet, deep down, he couldn't deny the satisfaction of knowing that the people who had doubted him would one day see just how wrong they were. The rain tapped persistently against the windows of Gabriel's corner office, a rhythmic background to his otherwise quiet afternoon. He leaned back in his leather chair, staring at the endless city skyline. His assistant, Amanda, walked in, placing a sleek tablet on his desk. "Sir, there's an email flagged for your attention," she said, her tone professional but cautious. Gabriel raised an eyebrow. "From?" Amanda hesitated. It's from Charlotte Carter. Gabriel froze for a moment. Charlotte. The name carried the weight of betrayal and bitter memories. He hadn't thought about her in years, not since he'd buried himself in work and found peace in his new life. Open it, he said flatly, gesturing toward the tablet. Amanda swiped the screen, handing the device to him. The email was brief but laden with desperation. Gabriel, please, we need to talk. It's about Brianna. His jaw tightened as he read the words again. Memories of that fateful day. Charlotte's cold departure. Brianna's cruel words rushed back like an old wound reopening. Against his better judgment, he replied, agreeing to meet. The next day, Charlotte and Brianna walked into the towering glass headquarters of Infinity Systems. The stark contrast between their shabby appearances and the pristine elegance of the building was impossible to miss. Charlotte's once flawless confidence was replaced by visible nervousness. Brianna, once haughty and dismissive, kept her head down, clutching a worn purse like it was her lifeline. Amanda led them into Gabriel's expansive office. He stood by the window, his back to them, exuding an air of authority that was worlds away from the man they had left behind. Gabriel, Charlotte began, her voice trembling. Thank you for seeing us. He turned slowly, his expression unreadable. You said it was about Brianna, he said, his tone clipped. Charlotte's eyes filled with tears. Andrew's company went bankrupt. He disappeared, leaving us with nothing. The mansion, the cars, everything is gone. We're homeless. Gabriel's face remained impassive. He looked at Brianna, whose once arrogant posture had crumbled. Dad, she said, her voice cracking, I'm so sorry. For everything I said, for everything I did. I was young and stupid, and I didn't know what I was doing. Tears streamed down her face as she choked out her words. Please forgive me. Gabriel folded his arms, his gaze steady but cold. Forgive you? For calling me a loser? For turning your back on me when I needed you most? Charlotte stepped forward, wringing her hands. Gabriel, I know we hurt you, but please think of Brianna. She's your daughter. She's lost, and she needs you. Gabriel's lips curled into a bitter smile. Now you want me to think of her? Where was this concern when you walked out of my life? Where was this when you chose Andrew's jet over my loyalty? Charlotte fell to her knees, sobbing uncontrollably. Please, Gabriel, I'll do anything. Just give us a chance to make this right. We've lost everything. You're the only one who can help us. Brianna joined her mother, tears streaming down her face. Dad, I'll do whatever it takes to fix things. I'll work for you. I'll earn your forgiveness. Please don't hate me. Gabriel walked around his desk, leaning against it as he studied them. The image of them groveling should have brought him satisfaction, but all he felt was an icy detachment. You know, he said, his voice steady, I used to lie awake at night, wondering what I did wrong, wondering why the people I loved most thought I wasn't enough. He shook his head. But now, I see it clearly. It wasn't about me. It was about your greed, your shallow priorities, and your inability to value loyalty over luxury. Charlotte reached for his hand, but he stepped back. Gabriel, please, don't do this. He fixed her with a steely gaze. Do what, Charlotte? Give you the help you never gave me? You made your choices. Now live with them. The silence in the room was deafening. Charlotte's sobs grew louder as she realized the futility of her pleas. Brianna buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking. Gabriel turned to Amanda, who had been quietly observing from the doorway. Call security, he said. Charlotte's head shot up. No, Gabriel, please. Don't do this to us. Escort them out, Gabriel continued, ignoring her cries. Security arrived moments later, 2 men in suits stepping into the office. They gently but firmly guided Charlotte and Brianna toward the door. Dad, Brianna cried, twisting to look at him one last time. Please. Gabriel didn't move. He stood motionless, watching as they were led away. Their desperate cries echoed through the pristine halls of Infinity Systems, a haunting reminder of the consequences of their betrayal. When the door finally closed, Gabriel exhaled deeply. He walked back to his desk and sat down, staring at the city skyline once more. A mixture of emotions swirled within him, vindication, sadness, and a strange sense of closure. Amanda stepped back into the room cautiously. "Are you okay, sir?" Gabriel nodded slowly. "Yes, I'm fine." Amanda hesitated before speaking again. "For what it's worth, you did the right thing." Gabriel didn't respond immediately. He turned to face her, his expression thoughtful. "Maybe. Or maybe I just did what they deserved." Amanda nodded and left the room, leaving Gabriel alone with his thoughts. For the first time in years, he felt truly free. Gabriel pulled into the driveway of his sprawling suburban home just as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the sky in hues of orange and purple. The sound of laughter echoed from the backyard, where his two young children, Max and Camila, were playing tag under the watchful eye of their mother, Claire. As Gabriel stepped out of his car, Max spotted him and shouted, "Daddy's home." The boy sprinted toward him, followed closely by Camila, her curly hair bouncing as she ran. Gabriel scooped Max into his arms and bent down to kiss Camila's forehead. "Hey, my little troublemakers. Did you behave for Mom today?" Camila giggled. "Mostly. Max cheated at tag." "Did not," Max protested, his face scrunched in indignation. All right, Gabriel said, laughing. "We'll have a rematch after dinner. Deal?" The children cheered and ran back to the yard, their giggles filling the air. Claire walked over, her soft smile illuminated by the porch light. She wrapped her arms around Gabriel, pulling him into a warm embrace. "Long day?" she asked, her voice soothing. Gabriel exhaled deeply, resting his forehead against hers. "You could say that, but it's over now, and I'm exactly where I want to be." Later that evening, the family sat around the dining table, enjoying Claire's homemade lasagna. Max recounted his adventures in school, while Camila proudly displayed her drawing of a colorful butterfly. "This is the best butterfly ever, Soph," Gabriel said, admiring the picture. "Do you really think so, Daddy?" she asked, her eyes sparkling. "I know so," he replied, ruffling her hair. Claire watched the scene unfold, her heart swelling with pride. After dinner, as the kids got ready for bed, she joined Gabriel on the back porch. They sat side by side, watching fireflies dance in the cool night air. "You've been quiet tonight," Claire said, breaking the silence. "Everything okay?" Gabriel nodded. "It is now. I saw Charlotte and Brianna today." Claire's brow furrowed. "How did that go?" "They wanted help. They've lost everything." He paused, his voice steady. "I said no." Claire reached for his hand, her touch grounding him. "You're allowed to protect yourself, Gabriel. After everything they put you through, you don't owe them anything." "I know," he said, his gaze fixed on the stars. "And for the first time, I don't feel guilty about it. They made their choices. I've made mine." Claire leaned her head against his shoulder. "You're a good man, Gabriel. You've built an incredible life for us, for our kids. That's what matters." Gabriel smiled, a sense of peace washing over him. "Thanks to you, Claire. You've been my anchor through it all." Meanwhile, miles away in a dilapidated apartment complex, Charlotte and Brianna sat in silence. The once proud woman who had flaunted her wealth now struggled to stretch a modest paycheck to cover rent and groceries. Charlotte glanced at the empty cupboards and sighed. "I can't believe it's come to this," she muttered, her voice tinged with bitterness. Brianna, sitting cross-legged on a worn-out couch, stared at the floor. "I should have stayed with Dad," she said quietly, her voice cracking. Charlotte shot her a look, frustration flickering across her face. "And what? Live a mediocre life with a man who had no ambition." Brianna's eyes snapped up, filled with anger and regret. "That mediocre man built an empire, Mom, and he was there for us. We left him, not the other way around." Charlotte's face softened, and she turned away, guilt creeping into her expression. "I thought I was doing what was best for us." "For you?" "Well, you were wrong," Brianna said, her voice heavy with emotion. "And now we're paying for it." As weeks turned into months, Charlotte and Brianna's situation worsened. They applied for jobs, facing rejection after rejection. Charlotte took a position as a receptionist at a small office, while Brianna worked part-time at a cafe, barely making enough to contribute. One day, Brianna walked past a newsstand and froze. The front page featured a profile of Gabriel, now hailed as a visionary entrepreneur. The headline read, "From Walmart to Wall Street, the billionaire who beat the odds." Tears welled up in her eyes as she read the article. It detailed his rise, his philanthropy, and his new family. The accompanying photo showed Gabriel smiling warmly with Claire and their children. Brianna clutched the paper tightly, her chest aching with regret. She rushed home and threw it onto the kitchen table. "Look at this," she said, her voice trembling. Charlotte glanced at the article and frowned. "I don't need to see it, Brianna. I already know we made a mistake." Brianna's hands balled into fists. "It wasn't just a mistake, Mom. It was the worst decision of our lives. And now he's happy. And we're this." Charlotte sighed, leaning back in her chair. "What do you want me to say? That I'm sorry? Fine, I'm sorry. But it won't change anything." "No, it won't," Brianna said, her voice firm. "But I'm going to fix my life. I won't let your choices ruin me any more than they already have." Back at home, Gabriel found joy in the simplicity of his new life. One Saturday morning, he and Claire took the kids to the park. They played soccer, ate ice cream, and laughed until their sides hurt. As they packed up to leave, an older man approached Gabriel. "Excuse me, Mr. Carter," he said, extending his hand. "I just wanted to say how much I admire what you've accomplished. Your story inspired me to take a chance on my own startup." Gabriel shook the man's hand, humbled by the sentiment. "Thank you. I'm glad my journey could help." On the drive home, Max asked, "Dad, why do people always say you're a hero?" Gabriel chuckled. "I'm no hero, buddy. I just didn't give up when things got tough." Camila piped up from the back seat. "You're our hero, Daddy." Gabriel glanced at Claire, who smiled at him, her eyes filled with love. That evening, as the family gathered for a movie night, Gabriel felt a profound sense of contentment. His past no longer haunted him. He had built a life filled with love, trust, and laughter, a life that couldn't be touched by the shadows of betrayal. For the first time in years, Gabriel felt truly free. And as he held Claire's hand, surrounded by his children, he knew he had everything he'd ever need.